Good evening and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true and open debate they've been looking for. The Democratic National Alliance, or DNA if you will, was formed in 2011 by Branville McCartney, then former FNM Member of Parliament for the Bamboo Town constituency. He left the Ingram administration on what he said was a protest of flawed policy and the lack of opportunity for members of the party to express their discontent with the direction of the nation and the Free National Movement. McCartney said the DNA was formed to address the growing concern for the protection of democracy and the empowerment of Bahamians. Though not successful in the 2012 and more recently 2017 elections, a survey in 2014 found that DNA leader Branville McCartney was the most liked Bahamian political figure. On October 24th, though, McCartney stepped down as leader of the DNA, stating that he heard the political masses loud and clear, and he is not good for the party. Well, Christopher Mortimer and Arinthia Kumalafe are the new sheriff and deputy sheriff of the DNA. Tonight, we're going to speak with them about the party's future and, of course, get their views on a number of current issues. Our topic, DNA, just talk or serious contender? It's all on the record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break.
On the Record is brought to you by Alive, the nation's newest and best LTE network.
Good to be alive.
Do you believe in light? Do you believe in love? Do you believe in precious moments? Do you believe in magic? Do you believe in tradition? Do you believe in family? Do you believe in home? I believe in the best Christmas ever. For everyone, everywhere. Believe in best. Alive.
Are you afraid to swipe your card and you don't like to carry cash? If so, you need checks. Executive Printers can make checks for all your needs. They have laser checks, personal checks, continuous checks, and more. All checks have up to 15 security features, so you know you'll be protected. You can even customize your checks. Come and see one of our experts today, or log on to epbahamas.com for more info.
Welcome back to On the Record. Our topic tonight, DNA, just talk or serious contender? Our guest, businessman Christopher Mortimer, DNA leader, and deputy leader Arinthia Kumalafe, an attorney and former DNA candidate. First of all, congratulations to both of you. Thank you. Chris, you certainly have been with the DNA from the very beginning, and now ascended to leader. Congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
Arinthia, congratulations on your ascension. You are joining a growing list of women taking serious roles and significant positions within political parties. Not that, we don't have a history of it, but, certainly you have joined an esteemed sorority.
Indeed, indeed.
So I want to begin by, first of all, talking about what precipitated this change at this point. Brian McCartney, the now outgoing leader, or former leader, would have said that, he has heard the voices of the masses loud and clear. He's not good for the party. He's gone.
Well, I mean, I don't agree with the fact that he's not good for the party.
Okay.
So I don't agree with that component. But what I do admire about what Brand did was that he shows that in leadership, sometimes it's about knowing when to go, hearing the people, and being able to step aside and allowing the natural progression of parties. We never had that. We had someone who stood up and decided that he was going to move away from cabinet, from the FNM, started a party because of what he believed in, and he believed in the natural progression of talent. And so he did that again. And so we recognize him and we thank him for that. And he's allowing us to take the DNA in what he believes is an upward, forward direction.
What do you, or in this overall sort of post-election assessment, DNA clearly by the numbers did not do nearly as well this time around as you did in the 2012 election by all accounts. But what would you say from your perspective were the factors in your performance this time around, and how did the Brandville-McCartney factor, how did a Brandville-McCartney factor into that? And the reason I ask that specifically is because in many instances, a leader following the defeat of a party will step aside. Well, that's usually how it works. Mm-hmm. After 2012, of course, he stayed on again. But when you look back now at 2017 and sort of begin to look at what happened, what went wrong again, and how much of that do you think factored into McCartney as being leader?
I don't think it factored in the fact that he was leader. I think the level of fear that the PLP was going to win again, and the fact that the FNM was successful, I think, in tying, if they voted for the DNA, the possibility of the PLP winning again was what the driving factor for the majority of the Bahamian people. And the PLP in the last election, over the course of 5 years, the Bahamian people had such an entrenched fear that these guys, the level of corruption that they saw in the PLP could get back in again, led them to vote for the FNM. And so I don't believe it had anything to do with Mr. McCartney, and had everything to do with the level of fear that the people had in the PLP retaining office.
Do you think it was a good idea for him to accept that senator role offered or given to him by Loretta Butler Turner when she briefly took over leadership of the FNM?
Well, there are a number of persons, he did not accept that on his own. And that was an executive decision. And
you all agreed?
We all agreed. And so it's a fallacy to believe that that was something that he did in and of itself.
What was the thinking at that point? What were you hoping to achieve at that point?
Well, I think the focus was it would give the DNA the ability to push an agenda that the DNA really and truly believed in, which was how do we get Bahamians empowered? How do we reduce taxes for small and medium businesses? How do we drive down the cost of electricity? It was an opportunity, especially given light that many of the media houses were not giving the DNA fair attention in the run-up to the last election. And so all of those things played into that decision. Was it a good one? You know, looking back is 2020. We made a decision, and we live by the decision, and we continue to move forward.
Arinthia Kumalafe, you are now the first woman within the DNA to be at this level of leadership. What is different this time around, or what is different for the DNA that you are hoping will attract people? As I want to go back to when the DNA was formed. I remember the night the party, Brandon would have announced the party at Crystal Palace then. It was just this room of, I think, excitement and intrigue that this third party, and you know, there was a conversation that maybe for the first time this group has a viable shot. But obviously something happened over the course from that launch to now. What is different this time around? What is different about new, improved, whatever, about your leadership that you are hoping will attract people back to or attract them to the DNA?
Well, I think in the short period that the DNA has been around, the party has gone through a lot of growing pains. and we have learned a lot. We've gone not just now through one general election, but 2 general elections. And we've gotten a lot of feedback from persons on the ground, even during the campaign and post the campaign when we did our own postmortem within the DNA, which will continue even into 2018, our analysis of what we did wrong, what was the feedback from the general public, how can we make it better. We have a new team. We believe it to be a dynamic team with myself and Mr. Mortimer. We have a platform that we know started to drive the conversation for 21st century Bahamas and moving forward. And so we feel excited about that, and we feel excited about the opportunity to be able to drive down more into that, moving into the next 5 years, correcting a lot of the wrongs that the public came back and said to us, and we're going to get out of the gate earlier. You know, one of the things the general public said to us was that we were not as visible as they wanted us to be. And perhaps we didn't champion enough causes in the interest of the general public as much as they would have liked to have seen. Of course, we have our view on that, but of course, the perception of the people is the reality.
That's what's important, yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be taking very much note of whatever it is the persons are saying in the public media, not accepting everything, but at least looking at it through objective eyes and objective lenses to come to some sort of analysis as to where it is that we want to be. In January, we're going to be moving forward with a conclave so that we can set the strategic path for the way forward. And that's going to take some rebuilding. And we understand there's going to be some rebuilding, but every party, whether you're an established party or a new party, everybody goes through that after a loss in the general election.
One of the things that one of the political realities is that people, after an election, will sort of, for the most part, go into their hubbles or go back to their normal lives. Of course, social media has changed that tremendously. People, sometimes I wonder on a daily basis, are elections truly over? But for the most part, it is difficult to be able to keep that political momentum going outside of the election period. Once you know that the election is a year out, then people definitely begin to, you look back even at voter registration. People are very slow to vote, to register to vote, but, again, that's another topic. But how do you intend to keep people engaged, and engaged to the point where into the next election, you are still to the forefront of, or out there championing or doing what it is that you need to do? How do you intend to keep that going when generally people are concerned with bread and butter, issues who are just surviving on a day-to-day basis, or, lambasting the government or doing whatever they need to do within, outside of that election period?
Well, I think a part of what we're doing, just being here today, is a part of that. We intend to meet people where they are.
Okay.
So whether that's making the appearances...
So thank you for coming.
Yes. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for
yes.
coming. Okay.
So we want to meet people where they are. We want to take advantage of all the media that's out there, the diverse forms of media. And as you rightly mentioned, social media is really... It's a daily battlefield today. The politics never stops with social media. Right. The current issues never stop with social media. And this is actually a good phenomenon for us now in the country, because you see this awakening. You see people paying more attention. And so what we try to do is to link our issues and our platform along with what's going on with current affairs, along with what the government is doing of the day, whether that's the government or whether that's the opposition, and speaking to those issues. Effecting a very efficient PR strategy, whether that's through visibility in voice or print media, however we are able to do that, strengthening our ground game, being on the ground, touching persons, not waiting until 18 months into a general election, but starting the process. For us, the campaign is going to be for 5 years. Exactly. It's not going to be for 2 years. It's going to take a lot of work, and as you already said, yes, that takes a lot of energy, but we believe that much in the philosophy of the party and what we want to bring to Rawson Square, that we're prepared to take that time and to make the sacrifice.
Fantastic. We are at the point of our first break. I'm glad to hear that you said the campaign is going to be for 5 years, because I think a lot of times, there's that momentum right after the election over again, and then, people sort of fall off of the radar. So it'll be interesting to see, if you're able to keep up that momentum for the 5 years. But let's take our first break at this point. We'll be right back. On the Record continues right after this.
Get in the game with NFL Sunday Ticket from Rev TV. You'll get every game every Sunday afternoon in crystal clear HD. That's over 220 football games for the entire regular season. Plus, NFL Sunday Ticket gives you that died and woke up in football heaven experience when you include NFL Red Zone, a channel dedicated to every scoring play from every game and all your fantasy football teams. Get in the game with NFL Sunday Ticket. Call 601-8992 today.
Play with Island Games. We making dreams come true. Play with Island Games. We paying more out to you. Don't mind the noise in the market. You getting cash in your pocket. 'Cause Island Games is spicy and spicy is tradition. So when you play, we putting Bahamians first. Guaranteed to pay. Island Games. We like them other jokers. We've been here from the start. From the bike to computer. Island Games. We can make your dreams come true. We playing with Island Games.
Welcome back to more On the Record. Tonight we're discussing the DNA. Just talk or serious contender? Our guest tonight, Christopher Mortimer, Arinthia Kumalafe, the leadership team of the DNA. One of the things that sort of precipitated your ascension, McCartney, for lack of a better word, sort of turned over the leadership. That's how it sort of appeared from the outside. But what was the process for you becoming leader, you becoming deputy? And then is there going to come a point where you take this whole leadership issue back to the party, the supporters, etc., as do the other political parties?
Well, I'll answer the second half of the question first, which is absolutely, we will have a convention where those voting delegates of the party get to ratify and or elect various persons for various positions within the party. So that will happen. But to answer the first question, it wasn't just turning over. If you take a look at the constitution of the DNA, when the leader steps down, this provision under Article 40 of our Constitution that says that the DNA deputy leader will serve as leader of the party on an interim basis until we have the convention.
So in essence, you're the interim leader.
Correct. And that's the official title, interim leader.
Okay. All right.
So it wasn't just this handing over, it was really a process. And then with Arinthia, we actually had to have an election. So she's not serving in an interim capacity. She is actually the deputy leader of the Democratic National Alliance. So that's how it happened.
So you beat out some folks. Good to you.
Well, actually, we had a special meeting.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And persons were open to or able to submit their nomination if they wanted to run for the process.
Okay. What role, if any, will Brandon McCartney have in this DNA, in this dispensation? Will he still be working behind the scenes, or has he sort of thrown in the towel? And
He hasn't. Brand is still on the executive. In fact, we had an executive meeting last week. He was there. He is still offering his advice. That's a resource for us. And we're not in the business of tossing people away. That is a resource in terms of, what do you think about this particular direction? Or he can give us advice with regards to cabinet level decisions, how they go through things, and the entire political process. And so he has a significant role to play. And I've told him that he is going to have a significant role to play in how the party develops moving forward.
it is no secret that in the 2 times that you have that you've offered candidates for the elections, you've had some issues with candidates, and it has really been a stain on the body in some ways. How do you intend to fix that going forward? I mean, the leader is always very important. And in this setting, I always say it's the leader who sets the tone and it's the personality that people will generate towards. But you've got to have a slate of pretty okay candidates.
Well, I'm not sure if I agree with that. All parties have issues with candidates. The PLP had them, the FNM had them. The only difference really is because we are a newer party, those particular issues seem to be bigger than they are because we don't have the historical legacy of some of the other parties. So they can gloss over it, whereas we can't. I thank people who decide that they want to serve their country. That's a a noble goal, and I think most people should think about how they're going to serve their country and protect this country for future generations. But for candidates, we want to make sure, moving forward, what we're going to do is we're going to vet candidates. We want some of the most patriotic, nationalistic candidates that the Bahamas has ever seen.
How are you going to attract those candidates when you have the machinery of a FNM and a PLP and going in, you know, the possibility of winning an election? People run because they want to win.
Well, the reality is, if it was just running to win, then we wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. There is a bigger goal, and we see what has happened with these parties. You know, one gets in, the other people, they're straight, their people are straight. The other party gets in, then you're gonna be starving for 5 years while they get straight. There are a growing number of Bahamians who are more country first. And those are people who are currently in the House of Assembly, as well as persons who are outside of the House of Assembly. And we're going to take our message directly to them. If you want a country that is working for Bahamians first, if you want to make sure that your children are going to be able to achieve their goals and dreams in this country, look at what the DNA is proposing in terms of policy and how that's going to make your life and the lives of your children better. Because if that's what you are interested in, this is the party for you, because that is what our goal is.
I just want to alert folks that we intend to address a number of the critical issues that are facing government right now, and some of the more controversial issues. One having to do with MP salaries, et cetera, et cetera. So I in my mind, I'm chomping at the bit because I want to get to it, but I want to get into some questions related specifically to the party. Will you be rebranding the DNA in any way? I mean, you came in on a platform of a 40-year plan and so many other things that were, I want to say, revolutionary in some ways. And you took a lot of risks, I would think, in the way that you tackled politics. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. I mean, and I guess that's the nature of politics. But really, is there a rebranding effort? Is there anything that you're looking at doing that's sort of going to cause everyone to take a step back for a moment and take a second look?
I think naturally after a loss, you have to rebrand, right? But the DNA has a brand already. We had a leader. The whole genesis of the DNA was because of a leader who stepped out, who was opposed to a particular policy that he did not feel was in the best interest of the Bahamian people. And so the foundation of our brand is the empowerment of the Bahamian people, good governance, transparent governance, and accountable governance. And through our philosophy, we're going to continue to, we're going to try to transfer that into the mindset of the Bahamian people as to where we ought to be in this 21st century through our philosophy and through our policies. The brand that we seek to achieve is that the policies that we espouse today are the policies that are relevant for 21st century. We have said to the Bahamian people during the general election and post the general election that you're not going to get different governance between the PLP and the FNM. And as you said, we're going to talk about that later on in the show. But what you see now is a skewed philosophy between both parties. And we believe that we're the party right now that has a clear philosophy, whether that's our economic philosophy, our social philosophy, our political philosophy, where our political philosophy speaks to transparent and accountable governance, good governance, and we had a good governance platform speaking to that, which we touted very heavily during the campaign, and which we see this current administration is looking to implement some of those things. Then we had an economic philosophy, which again, we believe we started to drive those conversations and looking at helping small businesses or the average Bahamian through empowering them, whether it was through access to capital or access to land or reducing the cost of energy or reducing the cost of living, period, because the cost of living is high in the Bahamas. So those are the things that are real and present, and that it's a reality for the everyday Bahamian, and it's a reality that we live. So it's not something where we have to put a paper together and have some consultants come in and tell us, what is it that you think needs to happen? What do we need to say to the Bahamian people? We know what we need to say to the Bahamian people because we're experiencing it. We're listening to the Bahamian people. And so the brand of the DNA will be a brand of an institution that listens to the Bahamian people, that understands what they need, where they need to go, but we have to demonstrate to them that we have the strength and the capacity to be able to do that. And you spoke about how are we going to recruit persons to the organization. It's exactly through that. If you share the same philosophy that we have, which means we have to be very effective in articulating our philosophy and articulating our policies. If you share these policies, then you are a DNA. The DNA is not a party of color. The DNA is a philosophy. It's like a way of life. We're trying to say to people, we're here as an organ, as a vehicle to bring about this change in Bahamian society that we believe is relevant to today. We're not loyal to, we wear green, but we're not loyal to green. We're loyal to the aquamarine, gold, and black. What is good for the Bahamian people?
I've got to get in this question before we go to the break. And you spoke to realities. And the reality in politics is that it takes a lot of money. It takes money to keep the engine going. And then when elections come around, people, you know, I say, I don't know, the money must, it appears. And you are up against the machinery of two established parties who, in some instances, seem to have unending purses. How do you match that? How do you keep pace with that? What do you do? Because I mean, as wonderful as your messaging is, and get on board, and if you believe in the philosophy, and that's wonderful. But you've got to reach people in a way that only money can reach them. I mean, that is a reality. And not say money as in, you know, handing out money, but the kind of machinery it takes to win an election. Are you prepared, or have you thought about how you're going to be able to raise that kind of money to be able to do that effectively?
I think we're going to go ahead and fundraise as any organization know that they have to do, whether it's for the annual operations of the party to get stuff done, get our messages out there, purchase time in social media, all of those things we have done for the past 6 years. So we know how to raise money to get that stuff done. The question I think you're asking is, where are you going to find that money for election, to run an election campaign? And that's partly going to be the message that we're talking about. Those persons who believe in what we're talking about, we're going to be able to get fundraising to run an effective election campaign. But at the second time, we're going to push this current government to implement campaign finance reform. They said that they were going to do it. The current Prime Minister said that was going to be a focus for him to do, and we're going to hold his feet to account on that promise, because it is absolutely important for us to have effective campaign finance reform in this country.
And just so that we remind people, he would be the third Prime Minister who has promised that. So.
But we expect it's just a walk.
Good luck.
Right?
Go ahead.
I think we intend to push that because we need to level the playing field.
I agree with you.
Right?
I
it brings also transparency and accountability to the process. But added to that too, in order to ensure that we're not having a situation where an incumbent government is using the public treasury funds to fund an election, this is why we're pushing for other reforms in addition to campaign finance, fiscal responsibility, among others.
And can't be granting contracts days before the election.
Yes.
All right, we are midway in our show tonight. We are discussing the DNA Just Talk or Serious Contender. Our guest, attorney and deputy leader of the DNA, Orinthia Kumalafe, and of course the party's new leader, businessman Christopher Mortimer. Join us on the other side as we take a look now at some of the critical issues facing the country. We're going to get their responses to some of the serious questions facing the Bahamas today. Stay with us. On the Record continues right after this.
This segment is sponsored by Percy's Island Game.
Play with Island Games. We making dreams come true. Play with Island Games. We paying more out to you. Don't mind the noise in the market. You getting cash in your pocket. 'Cause Island Games is spicy and spicy is tradition. So when you play, we putting Bahamians first. Guaranteed to pay. Island Games. We like them other jokers. We've been here from the start. From the bike to computer. Island Games. We can make your dreams come true. We playing with Island Games.
Yep. I got you.
I really appreciate you helping us out.
No problem, buddy.
Yeah, but thanks for helping us move.
Let me see you.
What happened, babe? What you mean?
Our news weekend has moved to 7:30.
Do you believe in light? Do you believe in love? Do you believe in precious moments? Do you believe in magic? Do you believe in tradition? I believe in the best Christmas ever. For everyone. Everywhere. Believe in best. Alive.
Welcome back to tonight's show. We're talking to the leader and deputy leader of the DNA. Just Talk, a serious contender. Continuing our discussion tonight, we're now going to delve into the current state of affairs in the Bahamas. Very quickly, your general view on the FNM's performance thus far from May to November.
Well, I think it's interesting for, not just for myself, but for the Bahamian people to see that a lot of the things that the FNM promised in the run-up to the election, that they haven't seemed to have made them a priority, or they've walked back a number of the things that they promised, whether it's repeal of VAT on breadbasket items, education. And I think if you ask the Bahamian people, because my opinion on them, most persons will take it as a biased opinion, but if you ask the general Bahamian, their belief of what this government has done, and how they would grade them, all I'm hearing around town is this government deserves an F. So I think for the Bahamian people, this government has not lived up to the hype that they've created prior to May 10th election.
Should the PLP have won, what position do you think we would have been in?
If the PLP had won?
Let's say, let's turn the tables for a minute. Let's say we were talking about a PLP government now from May to November, a return to government.
Well, I mean, I don't think that was ever going to happen. The reality is the majority of the Bahamian people, even PLP supporters, did not support them in the run-up to the last election. So we either would have had post-May 10th, the FNM winning, or we would have had people voting for hope and change in the DNA. And so I think that the PLP was a non-factor.
Interesting. Well, I mean, in the past few weeks especially, there have been a number of debacles, a number of issues facing the Prime Minister and the government. I'm going to speak to some more recent. The debacle regarding the transfer of items in the portfolio of the Environment Minister, Ramal Ferrer, to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister coming out early on and saying, fake news, and then being sort of found out that this had been gazetted, printed in the Gazette. A lot of back and forth, and I think a majorly embarrassing situation for the Prime Minister and even, I think, to some respects, his press secretary.
Well, I think the Prime Minister just should have been plain spoken. It's easy to grab something from Donald Trump to try and throw people off. I thought if he was honest and just said, listen, I made a mistake, I thought X, Y, and Z, it would not have turned into the debacle that it is. So it was, I believe, a lazy comment on behalf of the Prime Minister, and I think he should be very careful how he speaks to the press and not try to create this distance between what he says when you have a press corps that's going to be on top of him.
Aranthia, do you think he's developing a credibility issue?
I think it raises several issues, right? One, credibility is one of the issues. The second issue is, does the Prime Minister really know what's going on? And now there's other questions rising. Is he truly in control of his cabinet? Now, we believe he is in control of his cabinet. We know that he's the one who has the ability and the capacity to appoint and disappoint portfolios. But when things like this surface in the press, these questions start to raise their heads. And this raises a lot of concerns for us. I mean, we could play the politics as long as we want, but we're talking about a national leader.
Okay.
We're talking about an executive body that is running the country, that has charge for the country. And it doesn't matter what color you subscribe to, you want to see leadership that gives you confidence. And things like these, or stories like these that continue to raise their head, starts to shake the confidence of the people, even your own supporters. So I think this government has to be very careful about that. And even though this may not be a DNA government, we still expect this current administration to carry itself in a manner that brings a level of respect to the nation, because the region is watching and the world is watching.
One of the more recent things that created such a huge firestorm was the Prime Minister's announcement that they would be moving to, or looking at increasing the salaries of the members of Parliament in the next budgetary period. Since then, there's been sort of a walk back on his part, on the part of others, saying that they will review. But had you been elected as a member of Parliament, both of you, would you have been willing to work for $28,000 a year?
Well, if I may, I mean, you knew that going in.
Okay.
The Prime Minister knew what he said in 2014. And so it wasn't just kind of walk it back. It was a complete reversal of what you said. And it plays into the credibility issue that Arinthia just said. You said one thing in 2014. It wasn't about the money. You said, nothing's going to happen with respect to MP pay until I've made the situations in the lives of Bahamians better.
Economic situation.
And he has done nothing regarding the economic lives of Bahamians. And so what it shows is a level of disingenuousness on the part of the Prime Minister. And that is my issue. And I think that's the issue of Bahamians.
Come out and support it and said they agree that they should be paid more.
I think a lot of Bahamians, there are quite a bit of Bahamians who believe that there should be a raise. And I don't think that's the major issue for Bahamians. I think what Bahamians are really looking at is this a priority right now?
Timing.
Yes. The timing is everything. Optics is everything. Perhaps you can get it during this 5-year period, but do you need it now, 6 months going in? And as Mr. Mortimer said, you knew that salary scale walking in, right? So perhaps, and the next thing that people are saying is, what have you done in this 6-month period to even, because you took a 2-month, 10 weeks vacations when you first came in. So what have you done so significant in this short period of time that you are even deserving of a raise at this time? The debate on the speech to the throne just took place a couple of months ago.
That was a little unsettling even to me, because I couldn't figure why. Well, I mean, not that I couldn't.
We already forgot what was in the speech by the time the debate came.
Yeah, that was very delayed, even from my perspective. One of the other pieces of legislation that has really garnered a lot of debate outside of the House of Assembly is the Commercial Enterprise Bill. Now headed to the Senate. Government says it will facilitate the ease of doing business and make the Bahamas attractive to niche high-value markets, liberalize granting of work permits and enterprises that wish to establish themselves here, and require work permits for management and key personnel. You're a businessman. How do you view this piece of legislation, and is it the right time, and is it, you think, moving in the direction in which the country needs to move?
I understand what they're trying to do. Here's the problem. There's no visionary component to this legislation, It is a continuation of what governments have done in this country, which is, if you give the foreigner or foreign businesses or foreign wealthy people the ability to come into the Bahamas, that economics will trickle down to the Bahamian people.
I think
that's exactly what it is.
Words used by the Minister for Financial Services.
But that's exactly what it is. It has trickled
and
down economics.
A rising tide lifts all boats.
It has never worked, Jerome, it has never worked in any country. Trickle down economics does not work. It does not get to the people who need it the most.
Two things. What do we need? I mean, I just had this conversation. I remember in the 80s, the financial services sector was number one. I mean, people came from all over the world to do business in the Bahamas. It is how we built a middle class. It is how so many Bahamians are able to live the way they live today. Not marginalizing what we did in tourism, but we have fallen so far behind. This is now supposedly the answer to that, at least in moving in that direction, according to some of the comments that I have read and heard.
Well, I think the bill, there's several issues with the bill. And as Mr. Mortimer said, we can understand what they're doing. Certainly this economy cannot prosper or function without the injection of foreign direct investment. So I can understand the government going in that direction. But we also submit that if this country is going to be truly prosperous and not just a facade of prosperity, then we're also going to have to pay attention to the local market and see how we can incentivize the domestic businesses that are here in the Bahamas. The challenge with this bill is this bill has several issues. And one of the first questions one has to raise, does it really make us competitive? When you benchmark it to our competitors in the region, and I think the best benchmark is Cayman Islands, who has a similar legislation that's already in force, that's already working. In Cayman Islands, you can go there, you can get a certificate in 5 days. The bill doesn't speak to how long it takes your application to be processed.
The ease of doing business is really the big issue, right?
Yeah, so we still have these underlying issues. You can get the labor certificate in 5 days for you to bring whoever you want to work inside this enterprise city in Cayman. We don't speak about the time in the legislation, but we do say that if at the time when the investor applies that the Director of Immigration does not reply within 14 days, it is deemed automatic. And I think this is an issue that people have because it's almost redundant, really. Because if you're talking about an economic zone, economic zones do not deal with the bureaucracies of the host country. They won't be dealing with the investment board. They won't be dealing with the Department of Immigration. The whole purpose of the economic zone is to liberalize an entire area where persons can function, right? And so what is supposed to happen is that the ease of doing business within that particular zone is supposed to be so much so that it attracts the foreign investor, or whether it's a local investor within specified industries. The challenge that we have with this bill is it's just a gloss over of the real issue. The ease of doing business is still a real issue in the Bahamas, right? There's still the issue of access to capital. There's still the issue of the cost of energy. There's still the red tape and the bureaucracy and the inefficiencies amongst the public sector and even the interaction between the public agencies. And so until we address that, even if the foreign direct investor is able to get the certificate pursuant to this bill, he still has to deal with all of these agencies.
He's still going to be frustrated coming and trying to set up shop.
And the time delay is still a very real and present issue for the foreign investor.
Before we go, you mentioned sort of these inner agencies not speaking to each other, and then sort of we segue into the public service and government agencies, and the fact that the IMF has sort of mandated, has said to government, you need to cut back to the tune of some 1,500 people, these disengagements that are taking place. What would a DNA government have done differently, or how would you have tackled that?
Well, I think one of the things that we talked about, conservatively, graft in the public service was around, conservatively, about $200 million annually, whether it's through contracts, 2 and 3 persons on some contracts. I think what should have been done in the initial, how do we control this level of extra expenditure, and how do we keep more of our people employed? Because when you start firing people, one person is a family.
Yeah,
and
maybe a breadwinner.
And so once you get rid of the head of a household, you now start to impact your own GDP, because now they can't spend anymore, and you increase social services. So I would have found a better way for us to find savings so that we can keep more of our people employed, while at the same time finding a way to grow our economy, make the ease of business easier and the cost of doing business in the country lower.
We are at the point of our final break almost, yeah. We're going to take a quick break, come back, our discussion continues on the record right after this.
Do you believe in light? Do you believe in love? Do you believe in precious moments? Do you believe in magic? Do you believe in tradition? I believe in the best Christmas ever. For everyone. Everywhere. Believe in best. Live.
Since our first episode, On the Record has had a profound effect on audiences, each week we push the boundaries of political debate, exploring the challenges of governance, the excitement of opposition politics, all against the backdrop of a majority young and oftentimes impatient electorate.
You are the expert here, yet you've done nothing. You appear to have no plan.
And from the time man has been on this world, men have been making mistakes.
God realized that's why he make hell.
Well, wait a minute, sir.
This is a benefit of being an independent juror. I don't have to sit there and squabble about who did what over the past 40, however many years.
We touch on the controversial, contentious, and current. Our goal, to leave audiences more informed to make better decisions. Be sure and join us each Thursday at 8 p.m., cable channel 212. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We hope to see you then.
Play with Island Games. We making dreams come true. Play with Island Games. We paying more out to you. Don't mind the noise in the market. You getting cash in your pocket. 'Cause Island Games is spicy and spicy is tradition. So when you play, we putting Bahamians first. Guaranteed to pay. Island Games. We like them other jokers. We've been here from the start. From the bike to computer. Island Games. We can make your dreams come true. We playing with Island Games.
Welcome back to On the Record. Tonight, we're speaking with the hierarchy of the DNA, diving right back into our discussion on some of the current issues that are in the media and certainly that the government has brought to light. As I sort of said off camera, this government has really been played a lot of hot button issues over the past few weeks. Prime Minister announced December 31st is the deadline for illegal immigrants to leave the Bahamas and head back to their homes or wherever. The amount of the amount of immigration raids, etc., has incensed even some human rights groups who have spoken out. But it is an issue that is difficult no matter how you approach it. Your views on first of all, that period to leave, which is fast approaching, and also what has ensued over the past few weeks. I mean, we had a Haitian sailing sloop that was found, just next door to the Defense Force base, and they've been looking for these individuals, but been rounding up people, much to the displeasure of quite a few people.
I think most countries, immigration around the world is a hot button issue, and regardless of the way you take it, or what side of the coin you're on, someone's always going to be upset about the position that you take.
Are we carrying out? I mean, are we acting in a humane way? Is I guess the root of my question.
Well, I mean, I think we have to be very careful that however we implement a strong policy with respect to immigration, that is done in a humane manner. You can't just accept, the Bahamas just cannot accept wholesale immigration onto its shores. I mean, we wouldn't survive as a country. We're not set up to do it. And so my position on that has always been, let's now deal with it on the front end. We just can't, we have to have strong national borders so that a sloop doesn't just end up on the southern shore of the Bahamas. And so, because if that happens, that means that the government has not done its job in the first place. And so the position that we took in the last election was that we would implement technology, whether it's drones located in Inagua, aerostats that we could have a base in Inagua, so that guess what? We can see for many nautical miles before they even come into the Bahamas.
On the approach,
and so once we've done that, then you can start to deal with the issues of persons that are in the Bahamas. But it makes no sense to have the front doors open. People come in and then you're trying to get them out.
One of the again related to immigration, but in a different way. The government moving to amend the law to ensure that children born outside of the Bahamas to Bahamian women receive Bahamian citizenship, a part of a change to the law. Also gathering some criticism from some who say this is in direct, I guess I could use contravention to the Constitution. This, of course, following up on the failed referendum, which had a compendium of changes that would to come to speak to citizenship and things of this nature. Justice Jones saw it from the very beginning, said, you know, we just needed to change the law. We didn't need to go through this exercise. Your views on what the government intends to do and some of the support and even criticism that has followed?
Well, I think there are several factors that factor into this whole situation. As you mentioned, we had the referendum about a year back or so under the previous administration, and the people voted no.
Did they vote no, or did they vote against the PLP?
Well, see, that's why I said there are several issues, right? Did the people vote no, or did the people vote against the PLP? We don't know. But the presumption is really the people voted no, so they voted against the amendments, right? Personally, I support the amendments, right? I don't think any Bahamian should be disenfranchised from passing on citizenship to their issue, right? Whether we want to give it to the spouse of a Bahamian is another issue. The fourth question dealt with the equality under the law, and I think that's what a lot of people took exception to. And the reality is, even if we do make these amendments in the Parliament, we're still going to have that inequity in our supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution. But right now, what the current administration is faced with, they still have these issues, because even though the Bahamian people voted no, there are several Bahamians that are impacted by the situation. You have Bahamians whose children have to wait until they're the age of 18 to apply for citizenship,
In a
which
country
puts
that
them
they've spent all their lives in.
precisely, which puts them in the same boat as a migrant person, somebody who came here, whether it was legally and then became illegal, or came here illegally initially. So these persons have to be addressed in society, even though they're not the majority, they're minority. But the question is, and as you pointed out, there are certain issues that are coming out of this. Does this government have the mandate to go to Parliament to do that in face of the referendum? While I may support the amendments, and I do support the amendments, and while I support a change in the Constitution that brings about this equity under the law, the question is, do I have the right, whether it's just me or whether it's a government of 35 members of Parliament saying we should change this, do I have the right to overturn the will of the Bahamian people?
Well, we would have seen it previously with the gaming.
Well, this is
Act
precisely,
as well.
and a lot of persons...
People voted no, but I mean,
this
the gaming house is illegal in the Bahamas now.
But this, so the question is, are we living in a true democracy? And a lot of Bahamians said that, well, certainly some of the commentary that came out of the equality referendum was, I voted no because I voted a certain way the last time and the administration disregarded it, right? So while you may have your personal views, the will of the people must always be principle. You know, it may not be this generation that decides to grant the equality. It may be a whole generation later.
But can we afford to wait that long?
There are several persons who cannot afford to wait, and we should not have to wait. But we have had 2 referendums on these issues now, under 2 separate governments, an F&M government and a PLP government. So we cannot afford to wait, but if the Minister administration is going to move forward, they have to be mindful, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but they ought to be mindful of the political backlash that can result as a result of it.
Good point. The Minister of National Security and the Prime Minister say that crime is down overall. The National Security Minister, Marvin Dame, says we are going to see some encouraging statistics beginning 2018. Prime Minister himself says crime and the fear of crime is diminished.
I'm not sure if I support that the fear of crime is down, but I'll take the different view. I hope that they are successful on this issue, because we cannot survive as a country with the level of violence that we have. And anything that makes Bahamians safer, in my view, is something that the DNA can support, because you know, it's fearful, whether it's for me, my family, or children, and Orinthia, her family, her children, and the families and children of Bahamians throughout our country. I mean, you're afraid to walk anywhere, and when night comes, you know, most people are locked up in their homes, but they're just like prisons.
You know, I often wonder whether if the fear of crime is down, or people have just sort of resigned themselves to living under the current, conditions, like you said, people just don't go and don't do. We don't go the places we used to go. We don't go out as much. We have altered our lifestyles in many instances to account for the criminal activity. So it's like, I always talk to the, to the point that, is it that unemployment is down, or is it that people have stopped looking? Right. And so there is that question. But
I think people are more vigilant, as you rightfully said, and it's become a part of the norm now. When you go to persons' homes, they have big bulldogs, they have cameras in their homes. Everybody is just on lockdown. So I think, in a sense, people have seen it as a norm, but I want the current administration to be mindful of not getting into that space where we're still politicizing this issue of crime.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought that up.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about whether the current administration is providing our armed forces with the resources that they need to fight crime, and whether our members of parliament, among other persons in society, because as Bahamians we have to take responsibility ourselves. Are we providing the village that each and every one of us needs to be able to produce better citizens in society? Are we taking our responsibility as parents to be able to raise our children in the way that they need to be? Because the government is not going out there and killing people. People are going out there and killing people, and sadly now we see this rise in domestic violence, where children are killing their parents, and and of course we still have this issue between partners. So I think we need to take a level of responsibility for the situation and the social issues that we have here. But I'm more concerned about this administration deploying the right resources, as Mr. Mortimer referred to earlier, in the fight against protecting our borders. Deploying the resources that can address the issues today, perhaps not using all of the old tactics, but bringing in new ideas through technology and other forms to be able to address this issue.
One of the things the Minister for National Security has hinted that you'll see some new strategies in place. You've got a new Commissioner of Police, Commodore, etc. One of the things that the Prime Minister has said is that you will see a lot of government policies and initiatives, etc. Roll out within the new budget, as this budget is really what they're riding on that was left in place by the former administration. He has said this is not our budget, as is always the case. I mean, whenever a new government comes in, there's really not a lot of time to sort of change the budget and re-engineer some things. So it'd be interesting to see if that would happen. But from that perspective, do you see, given some of the things that have happened, do you see a lot of real radical changes coming up within that will be as a result of the next budget?
Well, I mean, I would hope so, and I would hope that the government would prioritize resources to the police so that they can be effective in the police fight. One of the things I would like to do, and I'm going to push for it, I'd like for us, myself, the executive team of the DNA, to actually sit with the new Commissioner of Police, because I think it would be good for us to hear exactly the strategies that they're intending to employ, because we're not trying to make crime a political issue. And if there are things that the police are going to do that are actually going to reduce the level of crime in our country, in our community, I think we would like to be an assistance in that regard, as opposed to just making idle chatter about the issue of crime.
I want to speak to an economic issue for a bit. Government has secured a $750 million US bond issue at a rate of 6%, come due in November 2028. Now, I am no economic guy. I can barely keep my bank account balanced, but this is, so I'm sort of taking excerpts here. It says the government has restructured current debt within the parameters of what Parliament has approved it to borrow. Government believes it's a win in spreading out the debt payment soon due.
Well, I think, they had to borrow the monies.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We know that. They went to Parliament, they got the mandate to be able to borrow the funds. I think several of the questions we asked was why did the administration raise all the funds in foreign currency, and increasing the level of external debt that we have in foreign currency as opposed to borrowing locally. because as you may or may not be aware, there's a high level of liquidity within the market now because the average Bahamian cannot access capital or businesses cannot access capital. So there's a lot of cash or liquidity, they call it, in the system now where the government is able to take advantage of that. Oftentimes people discourage governments from borrowing locally because they say it is taking the cash away that persons could be able to borrow.
You and I may be able to access.
Right,
yeah.
but that's obviously not an issue here because we can't access the capital.
We can't get it.
Right, because we have structural unemployment, underemployment, et cetera, and perhaps just poor credit worthiness. We're unable to access the capital. And so questions that were raised is, why did we raise all of these funds outside of there?
in US.
Yes, and as you already pointed out, they spoke to some of it. They said that they wanted to restructure some of the debt, which appears as though they swapped out some of the domestic debt for the foreign debt. And these are things we want to be concerned about and worried about, because then we're paying, within our national budget, we'll be paying interest on foreign currency debt. And being a country that's heavily reliant on our reserves remaining at a particular level, and needing those reserves to be at a particular level to meet import demands, because we're a country that heavily imports. These are all issues that has to be taken into consideration.
As we wrap up, we have spent a significant and considerable amount of time talking about the Minnis administration, the new government. Rightfully so, they are the government. They bear the brunt of the responsibility of the country. But since the election, the PLP has elected a new leader, a new slate in many regards. Your impressions on the new leader, the PLP? They have seemed, he and members of the party seem to be relentless even at this point in their opposition, and really going after the government in Parliament and in the media on a number of the things that we have spoken to.
Yeah, well, no one does opposition politics better than the PLP. They are fantastic at that job. But I think the problem that they have is that they have a credibility issue. You take a look at the current leader, the chairman. These are all persons that the Bahamian people voted en masse against. And so their challenge, if you ask the general public out there what their thoughts are about the PLP, it's just the same PLP that we tried to get rid of on May 10th. And so have they done a good job? I think whatever job that they've done is masked by the fact that the majority of Bahamian people believe that they are still the old corrupt PLP. And I don't see how they're going to change that narrative.
Interesting. Arinthi, I will give you the final word. What really are we going, what can we expect from sort of the political arena now over the next year? I mean, as we get into 2018 now, you've got, as Chris Mortimer said, the PLP, who's very good at being in opposition. You've got an F&M government who has obviously tripped up on itself, it seems, quite a few times in recent months. And now we've got a new leadership of the DNA. So a lot of things are, I mean, there are some familiar things, but there are some nuances there as well. What do you think people can expect now over the next year, 2 years, 3 years as we head into?
Well, I think first what we're going to try to do as the DNA is to be a better opposition even outside of the opposition, right? So we're not inside the House, we're not inside the lower or the upper house, but you can see where, you will be able to see where the DNA is going to be a very fierce opposition. We're going to be very constructive. We're going to be very, we're going to critique this current administration, whether it's positive or whether it's negative, and we're going to guide them in the way we believe can put them back on the right track. But we're really hoping that this current administration regains focus, gets some focus and direction, and go back to what they claim was their manifesto or their plan to bring about the relief to the Bahamian people. When you talk about what's coming up in the air, their legislative agenda, when you go to the Bahamas government's website, the legislative agenda for the next couple of months does very little to empower Bahamians. And so we want to see more of that moving forward. The PLP opposition, as Mr. Mortimer already stated, they've lost a lot of credibility, they lack a lot of moral authority, but we want to see them being a strong opposition in the House as well, because they have a platform that we do not have. And so they're going to have to get their acts together to be able to hold this government's feet to the fire.
Chris Mortimer, Arinthi Kumalafe, Thank you very much for coming on the show tonight. You've certainly helped to put a lot of things into perspective, and I think our viewers are happy to be able to hear a different perspective from time to time, and we thank you. And certainly we'll have you back on.
Thank you.
Congratulations again on your appointments. We hope that you have enjoyed our show tonight. Special thanks to Christopher Mortimer, Arinthia Kumalafe, my producer, technical staff, and of course you, the audience, for watching week after week. Be sure and join us for more On the Record next week, same time, same place. Once again, I'm Jerome Sawyer. See you next time.